Dane Rose, and in this video I invite you to join me on what is just as exciting for me as it is to you. It's riffing on thoughts about consciousness. What creates consciousness? And we've got a whiteboard here, and one of the interesting things is that it's very hard to see consciousness directly. So it's almost as if consciousness emerges in a relationship between two different things. This pattern interfering with this pattern. In this thought, it's my words landing on your ears and in your mind, creating sparks that you experience as consciousness. But what I want to do is lay out a map that, to be candid, I'm inventing on the spot. I've been mulling about these ideas and trying to come up with, a map that has a place for all these different kind of focal points where consciousness exists, and so I can make sense of it. And if you've ever been curious of consciousness, you may enjoy coming along for the ride. So one of the interesting things, we've got this whiteboard, and then I've put numbers, and then I've put some letters here, and I've got a wave pattern. So that's kind of our beginning point. And here's why. One of the things that I'm going to suggest is that in the fabric of space, it's the dot that we're conscious of. In other words, we're not conscious of just space. Now, this is a big deal because just space, silence, emptiness, white, just space is 99.999% of what exists. And this starts at a very micro level where we have the nucleus of an atom is just a very, 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 very tiny part of the entire space of an atom that is taken up in a microcosm of, for example, the solar system, where, in the solar system we have vast amounts of space that are occupied in very tiny points by planets in that space. And 99% of the solar system is space in relationship to itself, punctuated by these little dots, And what's interesting is that our consciousness, our conscious mind, is the dot. It's the dot. It's not the space. And so if we go up to this thing of numbers where, we've got 14, we can look at this, objectively and say, it looks like I've used a rough spacing, since I've just eyeballed it, about 1.5 inches per number. But let's just assume that I've used 1 inch. And if we say, okay, from here to here is 1 inch. Well, what we're focusing in on is the points. The 1, the 2, the this, the line. But in a very real way, there is an infinite amount of space that exists between the 1 and the 2. There's an infinite amount of space that exists because the space is limited only to the smallness of our ability to break it down into components. In other words, there is a device that can break 1 inch down into millionths. And so that measures the space between 1/millionth of an inch and 1/millionth of an inch. But there's infinite spaces inside and in the gap between the millionth and the millionth of an inch. And so the question is, how small can you go before a millionth of a millionth of a millionth of a millionth of an inch is very, very big? That's how much space is in, every point. But when we say 6 inches, what we focus on is this and this. We focus on the edges of space, not the space itself. We focus on the edges of space. And what I'm pointing out is just that the bias of our observing and measuring device, because what I want to suggest is that, we've got sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. That's sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. These are the 5 senses. Now, these are like the 5 rulers. So, for example, this ruler can measure the distance of this wave, and it can say that the wave pattern is, roughly 2 inches wide. So that this could be a 2-inch wave. And so if this didn't exist, we couldn't say that it is a 2-inch wave. It's a wave. It's the intersection of a measuring device with an object that is conscious, that allows us to consciously measure it. And so what we're really doing is, if you listen, and we're going to get into language a little bit later, is we're just fiddling around with all these shapes in relationship to all these shapes. And at each point they intersect, that tends to be the point that we measure, we observe, we measure, and then we're conscious of. So we observe that this is 14. And we tend to focus on the edges. The question is, why is that? Why is that? Why are we so focused on the tiniest part of reality? And it's the very tiny sphere of our own consciousness, meaning we have a lens, often called the ego. The ego is the lens that says this is me and this is everyone else. This is everything else and this is me. We have a lens. We have a lens that, as known as the ego, that's very, very tiny. And you can see how tiny this lens is when you try to remember something. Because if you just look at the word remember, and we're going to get into language, if you look at the word remember, it is to reassemble. To dismember something is to take it apart. To remember it is to put it back together. And so stuff's out there, and then we put it back together inside. So it's out there, in this analogy, and we remember it by saying, oh, I remember that this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and then there was this. And that's the remembering. That's putting it back together. That's this little box here, taking a series of events and reassembling them in virtual reality, in the reality that's in here. Now, what's very interesting is, much like a tape recorder remembers, a tape recorder records, and then a tape recorder remembers. remembers what it recorded by playing what it recorded. And so it's very much like that we've got these 5 senses that are 5 different tape recorders. And if all of this gets a little bit overwhelming, confusing, a bit hard to track and integrate, join the club, because we've got this tiny little mind, which you can kind of get a sense of how tiny it is when you try and remember a new telephone number. Now, it gets easier, of course, when you've said it and done it, 200 times. But to remember a new telephone number or a license plate, I sometimes have this experience where, I have to fill out forms sometimes. What's your license plate number? And I walk out and say, 6PT4, and I think I've got it. And then it's like, no, did I? And I have to go out again. And this is just to look at a license plate. This is how tiny our capacity to remember something is. And then there's other things that we can do in great detail, but there's an interesting dance which we don't fully understand. Some of the memory experts that can memorize whole books and stuff understand more of this remembering process and this associating process. But for the typical person, just trying to remember that a license plate is sometimes a big deal. Now, this, of course, becomes very problematic when studies show that in crime scenes, because there's actually been some good documentaries on witness, they will actually video what's happened, and then they will interview all the strangers in the area and say, did you hear and see what happened? Did you hear and see what happens? And then they'll lay that against the video. And what they've shown is that people are more suggestible to what other people have said than they are to their own senses, for example, for memory. And so, this is this is a big problem, when it comes to convicting someone, because there's at least a 50% gap in the average remembering, particularly when things happen rather fast and you weren't focusing on them. And then there's other fun games. You remember that trick where the black gorilla goes through an entire basketball game and nobody notices it, or very few people do because they're busy counting the bounces. There's this whole thing of focus, and that's actually one of the most interesting things, is that and it's one of the reasons we need this drawing, is we've got to use this very narrow beam focus that we've got, which imaginatively fills in the gap, meaning what you're actually looking at, like your eyes are only observing 50% of what's happening on this camera. 50%. Your ears are hearing 50% of what's being said. Now, what's being happened is inside the brain, there's a reconstruction. There's a reconstruction and there is a sense. So that even though I'm only seeing you right now, there's a sense that I know the space I'm in. But how do I know it? There's a sense of that. There's kind of a reproduction of that space inside my mind that gives me a sense that as I turn my attention back over here and up here and over here into this thought, there's a sense that it's not jarring. There's a sense that my attention is returning to the thing that was there before. Now, this is a really, really big topic. Consciousness is a really, really big topic. And the best minds in human history have not cracked it. meaning Francis Crick and a number of biologists, geneticists, etc., over the last 100 years set out in an agenda to prove that consciousness was completely limited to the brain, was completely physiological. And they wanted to crack memory, consciousness, dreams, whatever, and be able to totally explain it in materialistic scientific terms. And they have failed, meaning the best materialist scientists of our day are saying, have faith in us. Have faith in us that you are nothing more than an arithmetic machine. And we will prove it to you. We can't do it just yet. Have faith. Have faith in us. And they are proceeding on the basis of every religion, on faith. And they have yet to prove it. And this is fun because the Christians haven't proved the existence of God. The Islamists haven't proved the existence of Allah. The scientists have not proved that consciousness is purely materialistic. And they haven't been able to explain. They haven't been able to create consciousness. So there's a lot of faith going on right now in a lot of different people. And then this little mind has to decide what to do with all that faith. Who to have faith in, what to have faith in, and why. And frankly, let's go into some of the faiths that we have here, because this is a wave. This is an energy wave. Let's call it a radio wave. And we come into language. What's a radio? It's something that does this, this, and this. We all have a sense of what a radio is, and yet we're all visualizing something completely different. This is where language comes into consciousness. But right now, there are literally billions of radio signals that are going through this hand, that are going through this board. And I've not drawn one of those radio waves. I've drawn a representation. Now, the representation exists in your mind because the word radio wave is something you learned in school. See, you've never seen a radio wave. You've never seen little squiggly things coming out of a radio. And a few hundred years ago, you would have been scoffed at. You would have been burned at the stake. You would have been considered a witch doctor. A few hundred years ago, the little brains and measuring devices that were on most human beings would say, radio waves? Radio waves? Nonsense. They don't exist. All that exists is what this ear can hear. All that exists is what this eye can see. And what these senses are measuring devices. We have the head, we have a tasting measuring device, we have a hearing measuring device, we have a light measuring device, and we have the skin, which is the touch measuring device, and then we have a nose, a smell measuring device. This is an instrument that measures stuff, that measures light, that measures vibration. Down at the the subatomic particle level, there reaches this point in the breakdown of reality where there's stuff. And if you look at it one way, it's a particle, and if you look at it another way, it's a wave, and you look at it another way, and it's a particle, and you can even take the same stuff, and it's if I'm vaguely up to date with the latest subatomic physics, it's cannot be a particle and a wave at the same time. But if you look at it like this, it will always be a particle. If you look at it like this, it will always be a wave. And so in that sense, the observer, the observing and measuring device that is used, being the human being in a certain way, determines whether or not it's a wave or it's a particle. And we're getting very close to, one of the ancient polarities, the yin and the yang. In one of our oldest cultures, the Chinese culture, we have this sense of the yin and the yang, where the whole, the circle, is divided up into two opposites, two polar opposites. But they do a very fun thing with the yin and the yang. They point out that the one cannot exist without the other, which is why they're never drawn without the other. And is this a constructive consciousness? Is it a constructive reality? Is it what is this? What is this idea? What is this idea? Because we have the 5 sensory observing devices, but we also have thought. And we have feeling. Now, does this exist without the body? Can you have thought without the body? Can you have emotion without the body? When the more we look into biology, the more we notice mirroring, meaning that every single thought you and I think changes our biology. Meaning that the thought, I may see my potential lover today, changes dopamine, changes serotonin, changes oxytocin, etc., in the brain in that moment. And the question is, could we have the feeling of excitement without those chemical changes? Well, in a lot of the studying, being done on, it's something inhibitors. I'm by no means an expert in any of this. In some of our depression research, etc., what we're doing is suppressing certain chemicals so that we can feel something. Did you know there was a study that said, get out your pencil, get out your pen, we're going to do something together. It's a lot more fun than just spacing out, and whatever. So, get out an object like this. Come on. Open your mouth, and we're going to put this in. Now, studies show that you are going to feel happier. Studies show that you're going to feel happier with this pen in your mouth than without it. Why? Because it replicates, not this one, but this one, replicates the muscles of a smile. In fact, when they have done a very fun study that everyone puts a pencil in their mouth and then is told to write an essay, they write a happier essay than the people who don't put the pen in their mouth. Why? Because in the same way that if you think a thought, it creates a feeling by changing the dopamine and this and that and the other in the brain. In the same way that you're doing that, you can create the physiology, you can inject the dopamine and create the feeling. So you can create the feeling via the chemicals in the body that then release in the brain and give you the feeling. Or you can put the chemicals in the brain, create the feeling, and then see, the mind has this very interesting ledger, so to speak. So a ledger in a business is kind of so ledger in the business, you have expenses, you have income, you have taxes and this and that, and then you have net profit. Now, the brain does some very interesting things relative to, for example, beliefs. The brain likes to have an equation that makes sense. The brain likes to have an equation that makes sense. And so the equation that makes sense for the brain is that if you're feeling sad, there must be something out there to feel sad about. And how that works is you can actually induce sadness into consciousness. You can take out all the full spectrum light. You can take out all the physical exercise. You can take out all the hope on the horizon, etc. And you will induce a state of sadness. Now the brain, the mind, the brain, will create a reason for that sadness, which is why when you put the pencil in your mouth, the chemical of happiness is produced, the memory in the muscle is produced, so your brain gets to work. Your brain gets to work and says, there must be a reason to be happy. Okay, what is it? What is the reason? We want to know. So the brain looks around. And remember what I was saying, that your eyes, your ears, etc. are only picking up half of what's going on? Half of what's going on. What it is, what that half is very hard to determine because we don't realize that our half is different than someone else's half. We don't realize it. And so half of what's going on is what's being picked up. So the brain has a lot of choices. What it boils down to, that old saying, that is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? Well, there is stuff to be positive about. So I put the pencil in my mouth. Do it again. Why not? It's fun. You feel happier. Get a pencil in your mouth. And I'm watching what my brain's doing. What's it doing to make sense of this happiness? And what my brain is doing is looking inward. Like, it has this sense of playful essence of Dane. And when it looks and focuses on that, it's happy. But what it might equally do is, I'm looking at this screen. I'm looking at the same thing you're looking at, because that's how I know what you're looking at. I get distracted if I'm not seeing what I'm trying to talk about. So I point, that's the beauty of technology, is it's a measuring device, but I get to see how much of this hand is sticking up into the screen or not, and make little adjustments based on that because I get to see, I get to respond. So I'm looking at this, and it's okay. You see, the person who was here in this space before me did this lovely painting of a plum tree. I like it, so I see this stuff, but this isn't the best view. The best view is out that window. The best view is the largest Buddha in Thailand. The largest Buddha in Thailand, which I helped to build. See, this is a happy thought, so we've put the pencil in. So we're looking for happy thoughts to make sense with the happy chemicals. Because one of the things that we don't like as human beings is to say, I don't like this. My world is absolutely amazing, and I feel like shit. Have you ever had that feeling? I must be missing something. The world is beautiful. I've got the great job, the great partner, the great this, the great that. I love my dog. I make lots of money, etc. And I feel like shit. I must be missing something. Ever done that? And then you find something. Well, okay, right, yeah, that person over there. I don't like them. I didn't like what they did. And we create a mental reality that matches the fact that we feel terrible. But in this case, I can also look around and I can see off in the distance the largest Buddha in Thailand. And then I can boost myself some more. I can come up with, I helped to create that. Every time I go up there, I give them some money. I buy one of these stone tiles, and this is where we're going to come into culture. You see, because there have been 10,000 cultures, and there frankly just isn't a big enough board to talk about all the different ways we create consciousness, because it's enormous. But let's just carve out a little space here. Let's carve out a little space here and look at one of the lenses, because a huge lens, for those of you who have and haven't traveled, a huge lens is cultural. So in our culture, it's not okay to boast. It's not okay to say, I'm great, I'm wonderful. But it's really fun to feel it. I'm amazing. So I get to remember, but not talk about it. I get to remember that I have, great affirmations and prayer stone tiles that are the cladding of this Buddha. So I think they made it in concrete. Just hundreds of artists and, thousands of truckloads of soil and thousands of truckloads of, cement and stuff. And I've been watching it over the last 10 years, and it's just so fun. It's so fun to see an entire nation participate for no other reason than to create beauty. Beauty. It's just there. Plato, beauty, truth, and goodness was the foundation of the Platonic compass, the compass of where to turn. And here's a nation creating beauty. In my country, we're creating a wall. That's our big edifice, a wall, to keep foreigners out. And it's not lost on me that my girlfriend is not welcome to visit me in the United States. My girlfriend is not welcome. The process is not welcoming. There's nothing nice about it. But she and I are welcome in Thailand. Meaning, Thailand is a welcoming country. Much more than the United States. And Thailand is building an edifice of beauty. That makes me happy. I get to look out my window every morning and see the greatest Buddha in the land. I get to drive up there, see what's happening, which I've done over the last 10 years. and just watch this slow unfolding of something beautiful and participate in it. Buy a bell to hang and add to the ambiance. Buy a marble tile, so that it glistens more than just concrete, etc. And I can say hello to other people who are doing similar things. And it's fun. This is happy thought. So now what we've done is we started with physiology. We looked inward. That's what I did. But again, inward stuff is not very popular in Western culture. So we look outward. And we can create it there too. We can create a sympathetic rapport between the physiological state and the mental emotional state that sustains. It's a little bit like priming the pump. If you start on the outside, you prime the pump, but then once you've added a little bit of water into the pump, if you have ever used one of the old pumps that gave rise to that saying, prime the pump, it is to put a little bit of water into the mechanism and then continue, and then more water comes out of the mechanism. It's a lovely analogy for abundance. You give water to a plant, and then the plant produces something. Beauty, fruits, nectars, juices. The plant produces something that's more beautiful. That gives you back more than you gave it. This is how abundance gets created. And this is a thought that leads to happy feelings. So you see, we're off on a positive tangent. A tangent meaning we're selectively leaving out the fact that X people have been raped today. We're selectively leaving out the fact that people with abusive parents in mentally imbalanced states, meaning people with mental emotional diseases, including PTSD, are being given the right by our government to have a child that has a 95 to 98% chance of experiencing extreme trauma at the hands of those parents. See, we're not talking about that, are we? Because we stuck a pencil in our mouth. We're talking about the fun things. And so this is how physiology leads to thought and feeling. If we have a really great feeling, how are you doing today? I am absolutely fabulous. What do people want to know? They want to know why. What happened? Now, the truth is, nothing happened. I stuck a pencil in my mouth. I'm feeling great. Now, people are not satisfied with this story. This is where the cultural intersection of consciousness comes in. So we fiddle with it. We say, I just woke up. Maybe I had a great dream. I felt absolutely fabulous. See, this is not a satisfying story because in our culture, we have lots of narratives. We have lots of different things. We have a cultural container. Now, this cultural container is between every individual, and it's to some extent between every individual and itself. It's a cultural container. Now, what fits into this cultural container exists. And this is one of the reasons why it's in consciousness. For example, one of the things that happens to me as a business person in the United States in my cultural container is I get the question about 20-30% of the time, let's say 20% of the time. And the question is, keeping busy? Keeping busy? You keeping busy? You keeping busy? Keep them busy. That's the cultural container. And so if I say yes, then I exist as a successful business person within the cultural container. Now, if I say no, I'm not keeping busy, I do not exist as a successful person within the cultural container. But where the cultural container comes in is if it's not in the cultural container, it doesn't exist within that culture. So here is a question that doesn't happen in my cultural container. And the question is, what's your joy level on a 1 to 10 scale? When's the last time you felt peak joy? A day ago, an hour ago, a minute ago, a week ago? What produces peak joy? How long did it last? How many times this year have you felt peak joy? You see, that's not our culture. That's another culture. There have been 10,000 cultures. There have been 10,000 cultures, and we're going to create a ghost culture just to illustrate contrast. So in the ghost culture, someone says, they say, keep him busy, and I say no. Now in Western American business culture, that means loser. Now, in this virtual culture, first of all, we have to translate what keeping busy means into, excuse the break. In this virtual culture, we have to know what that means. What does it mean to be keeping busy? One version of it in my culture is it means you never have enough time. Always got more to do. Got to do this so you can do this so you can do this. I keep it. I'm managing. I'm making it happen. And I'm doing this, and I'm up all night, and I'm burning the candle at both ends. And I'm growing my business, and I'm pushing my body, and da 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 da. And all of this is good because within the blossoming of the entrepreneurial era over the last 15 years, this is the archetype. This is the cultural archetype of the successful entrepreneur. The Elon Musk, who revolutionizes 3 industries, working 90 to 120 hour weeks, burning the candle at both ends, eating glass, and da 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 da. And this is what matters in a culture of money and accomplishment and technology. This is what matters, and this is the way there. So are you in or are you out of that archetype? But in the sense of, peak joy. In peak joy, it doesn't matter if you're a McDonald's hamburger flipper or an Elon Musk. It matters how you feel. It matters how much beauty you see when you're driving around, when you're walking, when you're looking at a customer's face, etc. That's what matters. And every culture, and the reason it's so important to understand the cultural lens and its contrast points, every culture has deified certain human traits and demonized and shamed and tabooed other human traits for various reasons. And some of it has to do with identity. Some of it has to do with survival. The levels of a culture's hierarchy of needs. Is a culture dealing in survival? Is it dealing with survival? Is it dealing with security? Is it dealing with belonging? Has it reached a point of aesthetics? Young cultures tend to deal more with survival, security, and belonging. And they will focus on having more, doing more, and looking good, and doing whatever it takes to not look bad and not be rejected and be cool, to be part of the in crowd. And so older cultures focus more on higher needs. You'll find some of the most sophisticated thought, for example, in Chinese and Thai cultures. They're some of the oldest cultures in the traditional sense, relative to a very young culture such as the United States. But as with, understanding Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they build on each other, meaning you can't build a sustainable philosophy of spirituality and consciousness on the basis of joblessness, hunger, famine, and war. I mean, you need to survive. You need to be secure in that survival. You need to feel like you belong, and then you move on to the human higher needs, according to Maslow's focus. And Maslow is important because one of the things that does exist very importantly in our culture is data-driven science. And so thoughts that fit into that paradigm of data-driven science are elevated to the deity of the day, which is science. Thoughts that have not interacted with the paradigm of science. For example, the Buddhists have been raising their energy for thousands of years, and they have been poo-pooed by Western scientists until recently. And what this just means is that Western science is lagging behind things that through other mechanisms, through other lenses of perception, were visible to other cultures, but not visible to our own culture. So when you create a little box within your culture that says nothing is important unless it fits within this box, it does not mean that everything that is important fits within the box. It means that you don't know it's important unless it fits in the box, which means that you don't know that most of what is important is important. Because importance, as a paradigm, as a concept, is scattered all over the multiverse. The tinier the box that we say it's only important is it in that box, the fewer items will be in the box. So we just have a very few important things that we're focusing on if we have a tiny box of importance rather than a very big box. The same is true with science. Just, the fact that the entire universe does not fit into a test tube, does not fit into a laboratory, and can never be repeated. Try and say the universe doesn't exist because it cannot be repeated in a laboratory experiment. Okay, the universe doesn't exist because prove it to me. Tell me, create a whole new universe and tell me about it. Create a whole new universe and show me that it's no different from this universe, and then I'll believe your theory. Can't be done. So we overlook the fact that most of reality doesn't fit into a test tube when it's convenient. But when it's not convenient, particularly for a materialistic science and the little games that get played there, when it's not convenient, we say, no, you didn't have that feeling. No, you didn't have that thought. No, that doesn't matter at all. No, this isn't. And then it's like, well, yes, it does. I'm having that feeling. I'm having that thought. And it's like, well, prove it to me. Show me a sampling in the laboratory. Well, show me your sampling of string theory in the laboratory. Show me 10 multiverses. Show me this. It's not a fair playing field. It's not a fair playing field. But look at what's happening here. I'm going off in this particular thread looking at selective data because so we have, and this is why it's so important, because what you're seeing in me is what I'm seeing in me. And what I'm seeing in me is being manufactured in all these different ways. For example, one of the things that can happen is tangents. Tangents. You have the circle, and then you have like a solar flare. It's a tangent where something gets dwelled on out of proportion. And the reason this happens is, you got to remember, the ego, our conscious measuring device, our sense of self is very, very tiny. The multiverse is very, very big. So my ego might fit into this tiny little bit right here. And if I get off on a tangent, I can follow this for years, all the way out here and all the way out here, and not have any real balance of perspective to realize that this is a tangent. This is a solar flare. Most of what's really happening is over here. That's getting lost. And it's true, meaning every measurement and calculation and is absolutely happening. But it's true as an anomaly. It's just my life is that anomaly. And many of our lives are anomalies. This is one of the biggest challenges of relating to other people is, if you're born in an earthquake and in a famine, that is the entire universe for you. But it may be a tenth of a tenth of a tenth of a tenth of 1% of the human population of the planet. And so in the big picture, things are happening. But in the small picture, nothing is happening. The world is coming to an end. And this is part of perspective. And so I'm at one of those points where I've lost perspective. I've lost perspective about perspective. And so I'm going to take most of this away, and I'm going to reconstruct some new filters. I'm going to reconstruct some new filters about what's between your... So we're going to have two little people here. And yes, I've completely lost perspective about my day. No jogging, no nice breakfast, no walk on the beach, no great cuddles and stuff with my partner. I had an idea, and this is what's happening. We're now 53 minutes into this idea, and we've just scratched the surface. So what exists between you and I? What's going on? Well, first of all, let's just remember these radio waves. Millions of cell towers, millions of shortwave radio, radio waves from other planets, this, that, the other. The vast majority of physical reality is not measured by these senses. So the first thing we need to do in our equation is 1%. And 1%. This is just fictitious. It's actually less than that. But it's important. We're looking at consciousness. And one of the sub-themes of consciousness is creating. How do we create our experience of reality out of reality? So we're looking at consciousness, and the first thing to understand is that we're looking through 5 let's say 7 measuring devices. So 5 physical measuring devices. And then let's go back to that question. Is a thought and a feeling physical? Meaning, is there an emotional reality that exists outside of our physical reality? Does that exist? Is there an emotional reality? This is a tricky question because every single feeling changes our physiology. And the question is, does the physiology produce the feeling? Or does the feeling produce the physiology? Every thought changes our physiology. Does the physiology produce the thought, or does the thought produce the physiology? Or is it both? Is part of what consciousness is this energy moving to here, and 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 this energy moving to here? Is consciousness simply a dance of light, of an endless relationship with itself? I start to run, I start to get tired, I start encountering thoughts. This is so hard. I don't want to run. Come on. Then I start engaging thoughts. So I'm choosing to run. I'm thinking I want to run. I'm thinking I want to run. Then, and are you still with me? This is a long journey. And we've just touched the tip of the iceberg. I want to run. I'm running. I'm starting to feel tired. Chemicals are moving in my body. The chemicals moving in my body trigger thoughts that this is too hard. The thoughts that this is too hard triggers a chemical letdown that, this is hard. The chemical letdown triggers a new thought. Yes, that's right. This is really hard. The chemical letdown, the feeling, the thought, leads to the body getting more tired. The body getting more tired leads, so we've got a loop going on, right? Where did it start? Where did the loop start? Now, a couple of things can happen here. We can bring in a new variable. Let's say we've studied an exercise book, and that's a bit of consciousness we're bringing in through the eyes because we learn language. So, but let's just acknowledge that language is one of the things that's between us. And I'll go into that more, but language and culture and chemicals let's see what else is there. So let's say I've read that book and it's talked about the burn, that where you really grow is in the burn. Now, why is this interesting? See, what it's done is it's just taken all those negatives in that loop. I'm getting tired, that means it's too much, that means this is a loop that's leading to stopping. But what language does, and what these eyes do, and what memory does, because we've got memory. And then we've got data. So we look at that book, and what the book does is it turns it all on its head. It turns it all on its head. And it says, no, no, no. This is great. You've hit the jackpot. You've hit the jackpot. You've hit the jackpot. And it's wonderful. You're now in the burn phase. Use it. Run like hell. Burn those calories, because this is what it's all about. Now, this intersects with data. This intersects with language. It intersects with culture. It intersects with belief, etc. To say, well, that person telling me is, and then we've got algorithms. Which I'm going to call truths because it's easier to spell vertically. We've got algorithms. The algorithm says that generally, when I follow someone who's an Olympic runner, I improve. And when I follow someone who's fat and unhealthy, I don't improve when it's in the area of running. So we say that book was from an Olympic runner. The book said this, so I'm going to trust that, and I'm going to say, yes, I am making it. Tomorrow I'm going to be feeling pain, and then the day after that I'm going to run, and then I'm going to be going through the pain point, and I am going to be winning. And so we create a choice. Add that in. A choice to keep running. We create a choice to keep running through the pain, through all those thoughts, through this and that and the other, and experience the total burn, and then we follow the advice. What is it? Are we supposed to burn for 18 minutes? Are we supposed to burn for an hour? What is the thing? We follow the recipe. We carry it through and we see, can we replicate the experience? Replication ties in with our culture, which is all about, science and data replication, etc. And we are replicating this whole phenomena. We're replicating the whole phenomena. And we're learning. And we do it again, and we develop muscles, and then we say the same thing, and then we have a meme. We need a huge pyramid under this culture thing, because we've got memes, we've got belonging, and cultures determine what we belong to. We all need to belong. Our culture, existing among 10,000 other cultures in recorded history on this planet alone, determines what we must belong to. And see, I don't know. Remember that jogger that's running out of things? See, my back is starting to hurt. And my eyes want to close. And I want to rest. And I don't have a story. I haven't read any books about Olympic presenters or Olympic discussers of consciousness to know what the great Olympic discusser of consciousness does in a moment like this. I have no idea. So I just feel like, well, why don't I wrap it up and we'll do some more later. And that feels good. Now this could be, in the paradigm of different things, this could be the moment we're pushing through, or this could be the easy does it, or whatever. And see, this is where we have our memory. and our choices, our memory and our choices. Because I've heard tons of people say easy does it. I've heard tons of people say don't work too hard. I've heard tons of people say keeping busy. I've heard tons of people obsess about my thoughts and care less about my feelings. Interestingly, the one leads to the other. I've heard so much about all of this. What to do? What to do? I'm going to take a break, and I will see you later. See, and I thought I was going to take a break, but in one of our interactions with reality, this phone requires more pressure than the last one. Okay, so let's continue and explore where we left off, adding in a few extra items about consciousness. And we'll just riff and see where we go. So one of the first things that I thought preparing for this is that what consciousness is distinction, or more accurately, what our version of consciousness is distinction. So, what am I doing? I'm coughing. Now, how do you know I'm coughing? I'm coughing because making that sound is distinct from not making that sound. Otherwise, meaning if there was absolutely no distinction between coughing and not coughing, how would you know I was coughing? Now, that gets into language. If the sound of coughing is the exact same as the sound when you're not coughing, how do you know it's coughing? Well, if you say, this is coughing, and now this is jibble-de-doo, they sound the same in reality, meaning the voice is just talking along. There's no actual cough. But we have two words. This word is distinct from this word, and they could be synonyms, but now the words are distinct. Now you've got distinct words. So if we understand that what consciousness essentially is, meaning the best thing I can think of is that consciousness is a distinction, that this is a circle relative to a not circle, that it's purple relative to white, and that everything that is distinct, everything that we have an observing and measuring device to register as distinct, meaning we observe it, our eyes can observe this, and our eyes can deserve this. So our eyes can then say that this is higher than this. Now we have a distinction, and we can call the distinction whatever we want. We can call this distinction down here a coup, and we can call this distinction up there a hip. Now we have hip and coup, and as long as we all agree on what the distinction is, we now have a language where commonly spoken, if you cannot see this, and I go and tell you, in the other room there is a board that has many hips and coups, an image will pop into your mind of some kind of a shape that has bottom points and high points. Now, it could be a mountain range for one. You may imagine a blue shape. Someone else imagines a red shape, until you say, no. It is a line with many hips and coups that's made in coup. This coup being slightly different tonally than coup, and so that meaning red for a line. So this is how languages are produced. Now, once we have a distinction that we can grasp, we've got something conscious. So consciousness being the art of creating distinctions, the question is, how conscious? How conscious are we of a given object? Well, if we say this is the top and this is the bottom of a circle, we've got two distinctions. But what if we do another distinction? What if we say this is the left and this is the right? What if we say these are quads? What if we say these are triangular, 4 triangles? Or if we say they're pie slices? Now, each of these are distinctions, and when I say pie slices, maybe you imagine a bit of apple or something. So the more we have an object, we have out there. Now, out there is not very distinct, is it? It's kind of not in here, I guess, perhaps. We have out there, the great out there, the great unknown. It's distinct from what is known, but it's very, very vague. So what is known, what is unknown, we can say philosophically, mathematically, and scientifically that what is not known is much bigger than what is known. You think you're all great because you know all the ribs of this pen? Well, there are stones on planet Z27 that you don't even know they're stones, let alone what the pattern is. I hope you get the picture. What is not known is vastly bigger than what is known. But the more, so that's a very vague thing. We're not very conscious in the unknown, obviously. So how do we bring consciousness into the unknown and unknown? Well, first of all, we can start boxing it up and say, no, this is what's known, and this is what's not known. Then we can go in and we can say, okay, what's an example of something we don't know? Well, we don't know the temperature of planet Z27, okay? So we don't know the temperature. What else don't we know? Well, we don't know the humidity factor on planet Z27. Okay, so we don't know the temperature, we don't know the humidity, we don't know what it smells like on planet Z27. Now we don't know what it smells like on planet Z28, Z29, Z30, Z200 million. We don't know what it smells like. So we can actually start to turn the unknown into the known unknown. We can take the unknown unknown, all that is out there, we can turn it into the known unknown, which is all that is distinct that is out there. And we do it by making distinctions. Now, what distinctions can we make? See, we're limited to our observing and measuring devices. So we've got 5 little holes in our capsule that says sight, smell, sound, touch, and so we can make those distinctions. We have 5 easy distinctions to make. What does it taste like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? What does it do this? Da, 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 da. So these are our distinction tools. So this is how we make the unknown unknown conscious, is we say we don't know its smell. We don't know what it looks like from 3 feet away. We might know what it looks like from 5 light years away, but we don't know what it looks like from 3 feet away. We don't know what it looks like before we looked at it, so we don't know that. So what we're doing is we're taking the unknown, and we're making it known. We don't know this, we don't know this, we don't know this. Now this is an infinite list, of course. May or may not be in the abstract, but it is definitely infinite in the sense that there are so many unknown unknowns that we could spend the entire rest of the lifetime just learning what we don't know we don't know. Meaning what we don't know we don't know is so many millions of lifetimes dense, or big in volume, that we could spend the entire lifetime taking a very, very tiny bit of the unknown unknown and making it known unknown, where we have a long list of all the things we don't know. Now this we would then be conscious of. We would then be conscious of what we don't know we don't know. Well, we would then be conscious of what we know we don't know. My mistake. So once we have something, we don't know that we don't know, and then we turn it into something we don't know, we can embark on an expedition to know it. How are we going to know it? We're going to know it through these 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, etc. And we're also going to know it through our thoughts, through our feelings, through our imagination. Now, we now have stuff that is known, but how much of it do we know? So, for example, if we take the known unknown, that we don't know what it smells like at 12 p.m. on the 18th of January 1957, if we don't know what it smells like at 12 p.m. in 1957 on planet Z27, can we make that known? Can we take that very obvious unknown and make it a known unknown and then actually know it? Well, that's kind of hard to do with our relationship with time, because how would we know we knew what it smelled like in the 1950s if we're embarking on that, in the year 2020? How would we know? We don't. We don't currently have a science that can, in the way that archaeologists go back in time, they study fossils and blah, blah, blah. So archaeologists think they know what was happening in the rocks and this and that, 10 million years ago. They think they know because there's a science that they've developed that supposes that if this is happening today, this must have happened in 1957. Now, it's probably not that specific. Archaeologists wouldn't claim to be able to know what rock was forming in what way in 1957 and just that way. It's much cruder than that. So we don't have any science of smell. We might be able to simulate and suppose, but we don't have time travel, basically, to go backwards. So the best that we can do is to measure little points in the present. So if we send a probe out somewhere, satellite probe, etc., and smell planet Z27 at the moment, what we can say is that we know all of the smells at that moment in space-time that the observing and measuring device of the probe was able to gather. So what does that mean? There's a frequency range. There's a frequency range of the maximum frequency and the minimum frequency that any measuring and observing device can detect. So any measuring and observing device in science, in the universe, in our brain, in our senses, has a maximum frequency it can pick up and has a minimum frequency. So in the smell, if you think, let's start in with light because that's an easy one. So our eyes can perceive up to kind of close to the ultraviolet, that point. There's a certain point out where light is there. Other instruments can record it. Certain cameras can record it, but our direct eye cannot record light up in those frequencies. So that's the high point that our observing and measuring devices, our eyes, can measure. Now then there's a low point. And again, cameras can go beneath the low point of the eyes and measure certain vibration and frequencies that our eyes can't measure. But every single observing and measuring device, be it an eye, be it a human eye, be it a reptilian eye, be it a dolphin eye, be it a Sony ZX50i, be it a iPhone eye, be it a telescope eye, be it a film eye, be it a radioscopic eye, whatever the eye is, every single observing and measuring device has a limit to So it can observe up to this point, and it can observe down to this point. Now, why is that important? Because it's helpful to be mindful. Why is it important to notice that? It's helpful to be mindful that reality is much bigger than the observing and measuring device is capable of perceiving it. So there may be a distinction that this is a light wave and our eyes are tracking it, but there may, and in fact are, billions and billions of light waves that are above what we know to exist and are below. There are vibrations. And so if what we look at is at the multiverse as an infinite spectrum of vibrating energy, of signals, of waves, of patterns that is happening above and below any observing and measuring device capable of seeing it, that in the subatomic level actually interacts with the observing and measuring devices. And in certain experiments on the subatomic level, if you measure a wave with a particle device, it shows up as a particle. And you measure the exact same wave through a wave measuring device, and it shows up as a wave. So not only do we have infinite spectrums going on here, not only is 99.999999999 to the nth degree percent of reality in that category of the unknown, which is so big that we couldn't even read the list of all that we don't know that now we would know that we don't know. It's in some segments of reality actually changing based on the measuring device. Meaning that if we measure it through this lens, it shows up like this. We measure it through this lens, it shows up like this. In other words, it's dynamic. It's dynamic. It moves towards relationship with the observer. In other words, there's no separation from the observer and what is observed. Now, this is fascinating. This is fascinating. And what is the line? What is the line between that which changes to respond to the observer and that which does not? For example, this pen does not change green if I look at it this way or this way. It does change green, though, if I look through it through a green filter. And I shut my eye, put a circle of green glass over, and suddenly it looks green. And so it does respond to the lens, on that level. Children respond to the lens of the observer, meaning that when you tell a group of average children that they're gifted and that they're therefore being put into a gifted classroom to develop their gifts, they start excelling and exceeding all their other classmates who haven't been told they're gifted. In other words, the observation, "you are gifted," seems to elicit gifts, much like the observation of "let's look at this segment of reality through a particle-making machine," creates a particle. And let's look through this segment of reality through a wave-measuring machine, and suddenly there's a wave. Let's look at this child through the lens of "you are gifted," and suddenly there's a gifted child. Let's look at this child through the lens of "you are below average, you're getting special help." And suddenly they are not as effective and competent on the tests, etc. So, and then what about other bits of reality where no, the scientist wants to prove something else. And so they do an experiment and find the exact opposite. And so you have to create double-blind experiments because science is scientific enough to observe that science itself, the outcome of science, is influenced by the observation of the scientist, by the expectation of the scientist. So let's create double-blind experiments so that the scientists cannot influence their own experiment, because otherwise the scientists that say, no, that's not the way it is at all, will find that result, and the scientists that say, yes, it is, it's this way, will find a different result. And then there's those segments of reality that don't seem to respond. Meaning, if I argue passionately that this is a green pen and don't put on a green lens, it doesn't change into a green pen. But if I look at it through a green lens, it turns into a green pen. For that matter, the particles measured don't turn into a wave when viewed through a particle-making machine. They show up as particles, and when the same energy viewed through a wave-making machine, it produces a wave. It doesn't produce a particle. And so in that sense, it could be similar to saying, well, anytime you stick a green thing, you see green, and anytime you see a purple thing, you see purple. I'm just riffing. So let's say we now have something. We've taken it from the unknown unknown. We've now got it in the known unknown. And we've now got it pretty clear. This is X in the known unknown. But there are 8 billion, let's say 7 billion. There's 7 billion people, and they're all looking at this known unknown, which is now known. So let's say you've got the smell data from Z27 at 2:25 p.m. on a Wednesday in 2020. Its smell reading reads out like this. Chemical producers can now recreate this smell, or maybe a bit of air was captured and before it's fully decayed, now people can smell the smell. They can now say, do you smell anything? Yes, I have a strong smell. No, I don't smell anything. That reminds me of my grandfather's garden. No, that reminds me of the man who raped me. No, this reminds me of this and this and the other. Smell is one of those things that tends to bring up memories. And so then there's the thing that people will associate a given smell with various things. Now, this is consciousness. So what I want to basically say is that the more distinct an object is, the more consciousness there is about the object in the way we understand consciousness. Now, what we understand consciousness is language and distinction. So the more distinctions there is, particularly when those distinctions can be articulated. And here's a very interesting thing about the interaction between language and distinction. Almost all distinctions are a function of language. What do I mean? What are the distinctions you see here? Now, I want you to note what those distinctions are without language. So I want you to note them without language. So you're looking at, what is it? I'm not going to say because we can't use language. What is it? No language. What are the different parts of it? You see, I've just broken it down. I've created the idea of parts. That's language. Someone who doesn't have the word part doesn't break it down. Someone who doesn't have the word part, who therefore doesn't have the paradigm of distinction, doesn't see something separate than everything else they're seeing. They see life. Through life, if they even have that distinction, they just experience. Now, what do we use language for? First of all, we say, well, let's break it down into parts. Well, there's the shiny part and the non-shiny part. There's the points. Now, what's a point? How would you know this was a point or a finger? How would you know that if you didn't have language? So what I want to get into is that our vocabulary, the language we speak, and having language at all plays 85% of the role of what we are conscious of. That bitch just cut in front of me in traffic. Now, stuff happened. What happened? Did an object move from left to right? Well, what is left and right? Okay, an object moved over here. The person seemed to have brunette hair, seemed to have the face of what is called a female. This is a distinction. Now, she's driving a BMW. We all know those are bitches. How do we get there? How do we get there to think we know what's going on? We do it through language. And language is how culture is built. We don't like this kind of person. We like this, etc. So distinction is created by language. Now, the type of language emphasizes and reflects the cultural biases or the cultural imbalance. Now, imbalance is a word of language, but in the distinction paradigm of cultures, in the 10,000 cultures that have been human over the last 100,000 years, give or take, there's been about 10,000 languages, 10,000 cultures. Some cultures have talked all about the soil. The Native American Indians talked about our mother, the ecological source of us. Now we talk about master and separateness and resources. A resource, something to be exploited, extracted, manipulated, manufactured, created. So what are these things? These are just working with reality in very specific ways that relate to what our culture is very enamored with. If we take the concept of deity, what do you deify? Well, you deify what you serve. What do you serve? You serve what you spend most of your time, energy, money, attention focused on. That's what you're serving. And so in this moment, I'm serving what? What am I serving in this moment? Whatever it is, consciousness, exploration, growth, play, what is it? Is this a serious topic? Is this lunacy? What makes it a serious topic? What makes it lunacy? It's language. So if we understand then that distinction is paired with language and created by language, that language emerges out of and reflects the biases of the culture. What is a bias? A bias is a mutual agreement in a cultural context. It's an agreement within the population of a culture that we're all going to focus on this at the expense of focusing on this. Why? Because everything has a distinction. In a dualistic paradigm, if my hand moves here, it didn't move there. The fact that I didn't move there means X, Y, and Z. The fact that I pointed out that it didn't move there meant I didn't talk about something else. So we're in a dualistic situation where to do one thing is not to do the other. To go right at the intersection is not to go left. And how we're conscious of going right is distinction. We could have gone left, but we went right. We turned right. Where? at the intersection. When? At 6:58 p.m., as distinct from 6:59 p.m., as distinct from 6:57 p.m. We turned left in this car as distinct from that car. A red car as distinct from a blue car. You see how we manufacture reality with distinction. What we are conscious of is the number of distinctions were present. Now, if we didn't notice what the color of the car, what was the car? I have no idea. What were you wearing? No idea. What did you eat before? No idea. I ate something. What was it, Italian food? I have no idea. Was it pizza? I don't know. I just ate something. Meaning you put something in your mouth as opposed to not putting it in your mouth, a distinction. So in all this, now that we have something, we have a red car turning right at 8:57 or 8:58, whenever it was, at this intersection on this day. Now this is a something, right? So now we've generated consciousness out of nothing, meaning there wasn't any consciousness until we observed all those things. Now we've got a what, when, how. Now we don't have a how. How did the car? Well, we turned the wheel like this. How did that happen? Well, this gear turned like this gear like this. The wheels turned like this. The car moved like that. Okay, I got it. Why? Why did you turn right? Because my brother. Well, who's that? That's one of the 7 billion people that was married like this, that looks like this. My brother told me to turn right. That's the way to go. Okay, so we got a why, we got a when, we got a where, we got a how, we got a what. These are distinctions. This is good storytelling. This is good journalism. You want to make lots of distinctions so that people can feel like they're there, bring their senses in. What did it smell like? What did it taste like? These are distinctions to make it more real. So that's the other thing. Like at a certain point in the creation of distinction, something emerges from a faraway event and becomes real. Now in modern days, this happens on your TV. Now this is where distinctions get very interesting, because we have been on a crusade of fascination with pixels. Used to be 480 pixels was a good screen. Then it was 640. Then it was 720. Then it was 1080. 1080p, 1080 pixels, 1080 pixels. Now, then it's 1900 pixels. Then it's 2004. Now it's 4K. What? 4,000 distinctions. 4,000 distinctions. We've now got 4,000 different bits. So what we're doing is, used to be a circle cut in half. Then it was a circle cut in quarters. Then it was a circle cut into eighths. Then it was cut into sixteenths. And this circle was cut and sliced and diced and chopped until it was 4,000. Now, why is 4,000 so important today? Well, it just happens to be the point we're at today. Why is 256 million colors so important on a laptop? Now, the more distinction, the more vivid it is. And that's what I want you to get. A lot to do with vividness, with presence, with saturation on all senses. Meaning, if you can smell it more than you've ever smelled something, if you can taste it more than you've ever tasted something, if you can see it more than you've ever saw something, if you can hear it more than you could ever hear any sound, this is going to be the most real experience of your life. And this is what's so interesting about psychedelics. People come back from DMT or 5-MeO DMT or sometimes mushrooms, and everyone around them in the materialistic, rationalist, scientific reductionist model says, well, that was just a hallucination. It's a very crude distinction, isn't it? It's a very crude distinction, but it's basically a mind trick all in your head wasn't there. And they're like, no, this is what's a mind trick. You've no idea how vivid the colors were. I saw colors there that I've never seen. Talk about 4K. We're talking about 2 million K. You've never seen colors like that. You've never smelled things like that. I smelled something, I can't even describe it. I've never had anything, smelling aromatherapy. Give me a break. That's 2K aromatherapy. I've smelled 6 billion aromatherapy. It's like, that's what's real. In other words, consciousness is what's real. What do I mean? If we don't taste it, smell it, observe it, it's not conscious. Make sense? Can you chop out your eyes, cut off your ears, detach every nerve from your brain, cut off all your taste buds, block your nose, and then say, exactly, so you feel absolutely nothing and then the world is real? No, you don't hear a sound. A sound happens in the world, you don't hear it. Someone hits you over the head with a sledgehammer, you don't feel it because you have no senses. You have no observing and measuring devices. So it's not real to you. Well, here's the interesting thing. 99.9% of all reality is not real to you because it's happening outside of the range of what any human being can observe and measure. So it's not real. There may be floating planets, for lack of vocabulary, that are in the light spectrum, that have smells beyond the smell range any current instrumentation can smell, that have sight and light emanations beyond the vibrations any current measuring device can measure, that have tastes that if we had a mouth operating at 2 billion kilohertz would taste those smells, but since we don't, it doesn't exist for us. But it does exist for any consciousness that has the observing and measuring devices to observe itself as separate from what it is deserving, to observe itself as separate from what it is observing. Like you and I have the observing and measuring devices to say that what I'm talking about on this screen is not what you're talking about on that side of the screen. It's a distinction. So we know that I'm me and you know that you're you. We both know that because we look different, we smell different, we taste different, we talk different. We're talking about different things. We have a different sound. I have a different accent on that sound. I'm talking about different things. My tooth is different than your tooth. We've got so many distinctions that reassure us, that remind us, that says you're you and I'm me. But you're observing me. I'm not observing you. Are you real? Not to me. Except as a concept. Like I'm talking to someone, but it may not be you. Meaning I have a picture of someone that I'm talking to. And there's a 7 billion to 1 chance that it's not the picture of you who's listening. So I'm in an illusion because you're there, but I don't see you, you see? So I'm not conscious of you unless you engage, unless you make a video and send it to me. Now I'm conscious of you. I can imagine what you smell like through this medium. I can imagine what you taste like. But I can see you. I can hear the range that the microphone will project, etc. And extrapolate, and I can fill in some of the pieces with my imagination, just like you're doing for this room. Like, have you imagined this room accurately? What's happening over here? It's distinction. What's happening? Why is that picture torn? What's this? What's that? Why is there a dragon covered with paint? Who did that painting? Did you imagine that outside the frame? What about what's happening over here? You'll never know. See, this is how an object comes into consciousness, through distinction. Now, once it is an object, this is smelling at this frequency, sounding this and this and this and this. This happened, it has a name, red, and da 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 da. You see, and it's very interesting because the culture comes in here. Like, we're very big on visual in our conscious minds. Our eyes have overdeveloped as a sense. We've got two of them. We use them a lot. So we're very keen to know, well, what color was it? Was it a brick red? Was it this fire engine red? What's this and that? But do you understand that there are other cultures that are so focused on other things, they don't even notice the color? There are other cultures that they're all focused on the shape. So they wouldn't say it was a red car. They would say it was a car with diverging lines. A car with diverging lines. They'd say it was a car with asymmetrical or symmetrical lines. They would say that the gaps between the lines felt crowded or spacious, because this is a culture that focuses on shape. So, car went to the intersection, 858, turned right, had spacious lines, had lines that were 85% symmetrical, 15% asymmetrical, had spacious lines. The intersecting lines didn't crowd each other. Oh, that's very interesting. They didn't crowd. Well, how much? Well, it was a 0.6 millimeter crowding or uncrowding. Oh, that's a good. I always like the 0.6 millimeter crowding. I don't like these cars. Who do they think they are? 2 millimeter crowding. Da 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 da. That's the thing to do. This is the new trending thing, or this is the old traditional thing. Come on, let's have more 6 millimeter lines. You get the point that some cultures are focused on very different things than we're focused on. And why is largely a function of our history and our environment and a certain amount of chance and just whimsy. And then we come into this thing of what does the viewer do to the object that's been made by the viewer? And I want you to get that. If you didn't have ears, you couldn't hear it, meaning you wouldn't have made the sound because you didn't hear the sound. You've made the sound by measuring it, recording it, and reflecting on it. That sound, just like the 20 trillion sounds that are happening in this space, meaning there are 20 trillion vibrations moving through the space now. I'm not just talking about radio waves and cell phones. There are 20 trillion vibrations, etc., that you don't hear. You're not making those vibrations into sound, so they're not real to you. So you haven't made them into an object. You haven't made them, but they're there. All you have to do is go out and build a microphone that records them and then transforms the sound you can't hear down to a frequency level you can hear, and suddenly they will be real to your ears. If you don't do it, you'll never hear them. They'll never be real. The trick is, of course, why? There's so much overload of information as it is, but it's very humbling, I think, to notice. Humbling, a word we create in our culture. It's very humbling to notice how much of what exists doesn't exist for us because we lack the observing and measuring devices. Now, why is this important? Well, as I'm thinking about it, I'm riffing just like you. As I'm thinking about it, it seems like developing observing and measuring devices to see and hear realities we want to see and hear is one of the most important things we can do. Meaning, if there's Beethoven symphonies out there, as an analogy, that I can't hear because I lack the observing and measuring devices, wouldn't it be fun to get a microphone and start tuning through the soundscape out there and seeing what, when it's downstepped into a vibrational language that these ears can hear, sounds beautiful. Because wouldn't it be fun to know that there are symphonies all around us that we lack the observing and measuring and devices to hear? Wouldn't it be fun to know that there are tapestries of the most beautiful light art all around us that these eyes don't see, but that these other eyes that we haven't invented yet do see, that when it's downstepped and portrayed on a screen that shows them is just stunning. Isn't it amazing to think that chemicals within our own brain, DMT, a native chemical in the brain, released in death, released in dreams, released in creating some of the near-death experiences, as it's been hypothesized, can create an observing and measuring device to see things that these eyes don't see, but are there somewhere, somehow, when we align our brain in just the right way. It's interesting. Okay, so we've got an object. You're over here, I'm over here. This object, of course, is tiny, 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 tiny thing of what we know, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny thing of what we know we don't know, which is a tiny, tiny thing of what we don't know we don't know. And in that tiny little bit, we've created this object with all these distinctions. How does it show up? So it's now there as something, but it looks very different to a 1930 pygmy in Africa. It looks very different to an African-American woman who's been dealing with racial prejudice her entire life. It looks very different to a young child who's in a traumatized state. It looks very different to a businesswoman who's seizing every opportunity to grow her business. It looks very different to a child that has to study a mountain of homework. Looks very different to a parent who's lost her cat. Now, this is where we have filters that determine once something exists as an object, meaning it is distinct enough that it can be talked about. Now, remember, most of the stuff is not distinct, so it can't be talked about. It exists, but it exists for me and not you because I haven't got the distinction to put it into words, or I didn't have the time to tell you about the object. So it exists for me, but not you. But let's say it has been established. Let's say September 11, 2001, World Trade Center. We all know that object. What happens? Planes flew into a tower. Buildings burned up. The United States went on a crusade of hunting terrorists by murdering 200,000 Iraqi civilians. Now, this is where we start to get into distinctions of language, culture, and individuality. because we've got a common object here. But you noticed how I threw in murdered, because we've got different filters, or maybe we don't. Maybe you see the same way, but within the global structures, there's a lot of different ways to view this event. What are some of the distinctions that make one event look one way to one person and another? So let's go through them. So one of the interesting things about any object that comes to the senses is it is filtered through what is called the hedonic adaptation principle. It's as simple as this. You eat a piece of chocolate cake for the first time. It's the most amazing experience you've ever had in your life. You go on to the next piece of chocolate cake and it's already lost 30-40% of its appeal. You go on to the third slice, it's starting to feel a little bit disgusting. You're tuning it out. You buy a new Mercedes for $70,000. When you're in the dealership, you are imagining every little bit, and it is changing your life. Smell of the tires, the look of this, imagining what this person is going to look at you when you're driving this car. What's your boss going to think? What's this? What's your wife? What's that hot man going to think, when he sees you driving this cool Mercedes? So this is totally alive, filled with distinction. This is, life-changing event. You get it home and wow, look how it moves here. Look how it moves here. And I'm comparing the steering of this to my last car, and distinction is distinction. But after about 3 months, you drive the same car home, you don't even notice. It's like, what's the color? It's gray. It was a great car. Don't bother me about the car. I'm busy thinking about how I'm going to respond to this email. Now, what's going on here is the hedonic adaptation principle basically takes anything that is static in our reality and relegates less and less of our brain power to observing it until it moves into the background. Now, what this means is that person X who's viewing your Mercedes for the first time, it's like, wow, and notes this and that and the other. Person Y, who's seen it 1,000,000 times, doesn't notice it at all. So you got the same object, but you've got a different point on the hedonic adaptation continuum. You got a different point. Now, what else? You have the set point, which, for lack of a better word and for lack of better science, we'll call it biological, in a very crude, lack of distinct way, because we've done so little science about human experience. Give me a break. But Sonia Lyubomirsky, in her work, has learned in studying happiness, for example, that new stuff that comes in will push us out of our what's called happiness set point. We have a set point that we come back to, all things being equal. Meaning someone's going along with their life, a giant puma jumps on them, rips out both their eyes, they go to hospital, they repair the face, they're blind. And after a certain amount of time, that person goes back to the happiness set point that they were before they were blinded. Someone's poor as hell, they win the lottery, they've got millions of dollars, joy goes through the roof, excitement, exuberance through the roof. After a couple of years, they go back to the set point of happiness before the new stimulation. So you can see that set point in hedonic adaptation, you could say that by tricking and manipulating and flooding the senses, you can use the hedonic principle to flood beyond your set point to a certain point for a certain period of time, but it's on a deterioration curve, and you're going to go back to your biological set point and be about as happy as you were before. Now, this is important because this set point of life's just okay, life's absolutely miserable, life's absolutely amazing determines how an object looks. If life is absolutely miserable and that's your set point, beautiful person shows up and wants to marry you and whatever, and well, since the set point is life is miserable and blah blah blah, and you always move back to the point, it's like, yeah, this won't last, or it's no big deal, I'll still be miserable, and so you are. Now, this is biological, meaning it's not circumstantial. The evidence is showing that different people are naturally happier, different temperaments. So the temperament shapes the object. So September 11th looks different through a low depressed temperament than a high joyful temperament. A high joyful temperament could look at 7/11 and say, thank heavens so many people escaped. It could have been so much worse. This could have been a nuclear terrorist attack. Thank heavens. And this is what someone with a very high set point might focus on. Or they may say, I can't do anything about anything over there right now. I'm going to send some money to the firefighters. What I'm really grateful for is I've got you kids. And you're here, and this reminds me of how grateful I am, and let me just celebrate that I have you today. It's just reminded me again how lucky I am to have you, and so this is amazing. This is just amazing. I'm so glad to have you. And so this is an up. Or maybe the person had been knocked down a little bit and they go back to their normal set point. I was starting to get a little down, but this reminded me how lucky I am to have all of you alive. Let's celebrate. Let's hug. Let's have a cuddle. And so this is how someone with a very high set point might look at this event. Someone at a very low set point might say, oh my God, this is the beginning of World War III. It's just going to go downhill from here. I was just beginning to make a little bit of headway, and now this, and oh gosh, and now I'm going to have to listen to this, and I have to watch that, and it's like, oh my gosh, and I watch it again, isn't life miserable, blah, 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 blah. And that's their set point. So your set point will affect the object, how you relate to it. Now, choice also affects the object. Now, if you choose to step back, for example, there's a lot of heated stuff going on in the United States right now. Seems like a good time for a holiday. Let me go to Thailand for a few months to gain perspective. See, this will affect how the object is experienced. The object is experienced from a more distant or a close or this perspective or this perspective, and this is affected by our choices. Those of us with the freedom of movement, those with the freedom to focus and read different things, can change our choices. We can relate differently to the objects. And this is a very important thing, because if we are looking from Thailand or this and that, whether we're looking at the event from someone who's a dogmatist, who loses his temper and drinks too much, or whether we're looking, these are choices that affect how we experience a given object. Now, the other thing that changes the experience of an object is data. Now, this is a very funny thing, data, because it's so manipulatable. It's a very funny thing, but data does unquestionably create a lens. Now, here's what I mean. I was talking with a woman the other day who she'd really hurt my feelings because she'd humiliated me in front of a woman who had rejected me at a vulnerable moment in time. And so it just sliced in deep. And what hurt the most was this woman was in a supportive role, meaning this person was in a role of defining as my support person. So my support person just, engaged in a way that left me feeling absolutely humiliated, betrayed, da-da-da-da-da. Now, I didn't want to leave this in the space, so I said, I'd like to talk with you, and I'd like you to know how this hurt, etc. She made little time, and I got a little bit of it across. It didn't seem she was very receptive. And then she said, I gotta go, I've got things to do, and, didn't feel quite done. And I came around to see if she wanted to kind of complete things, since she'd left in a hurry and brushed me off in a certain extent. And she said, there's some people who let things go. And there's some people who do what's called a niggy sob. So she had this whole thing that she'd been reading about in her book about people who are manipulative jerks, basically, because they still have feelings after bringing something up and it didn't get resolved. And so what she was basically doing was she was looking at my follow-up as a chance to fully clear the air as a niggy sob, which was a bad thing because this is someone who's trying to get attention, da-da-da-da-da. This is using data to see something one way versus another way. Meaning there's another book. So that's the data of the book that tells you all about niggy sobbing. Now, there's another book that tells you all about compassion. There's another book that tells you all about, isn't it great when someone will give you the chance to clear the air as opposed to damaging the relationship. There's another book that would chide her for not doing her role in support and then not fully listening to the impact and going off and being busy and being overcommitted and blah, 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 and say she needs to change her life. There's another book about that. And my point is, it doesn't matter which one is right or wrong, and it's very hard to objectively say one approach is better than the other. It's except the data that we look through, affects the object. You look through a whole bunch of data patterns talking about niggy sobs, and suddenly you've got niggy sobbing happening right and left. You look through the pattern of shame and wounds, and suddenly you have shame and wounds right and left. You look through the pattern of people doing their best, and you have people doing their best right and left. And there are different data sets that highlight each of these patterns. And they're very much like color spectrums, meaning you've got every color of the rainbow present in most light spectrum. And so if you look through this part, you see red. You look through this part, you see yellow. You look through this lens, you see green. They're all there. It's not that niggy sobbing doesn't exist. It's not that compassion doesn't exist. It's not that dereliction of duty doesn't exist. It's not that shaming doesn't exist. When you have so many distinctions and you have a conscious mind that can only focus on a few things at a time, reality changes depending on which lens we look through. They're all there. But what we see, what's real to us, has a lot to do with the lens we look through, and that gets back to choice. Choice of which data set. One of the things that's polarizing America right now is you have alt-right media, people listening to these talk shows over and over and over again, and then you have alt-left media, and you have these different data sets, and they're both true. They might be exaggerated, there might be twisted a little bit, they might be contorted a little bit, stuff might be left out, but they're there. It's not like you can be a successful broadcaster for decades telling complete lies that anyone can point out. You know, for the most part, politicians can be pretty good at that, but for the most part, there's something there that's being exaggerated, twisted a little bit, but it's different data. So data creates our reality. Memory creates our reality, going back with choice, going back to set point. If you have a low set point, you'll tend to have more negative memories. If you read data about trauma, you will remember trauma. And so there's, the memory is one of the data sets. I remember every time I walked near this corner, 3 guys would jump me, humiliate me, take my lunch money, blah, 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 blah. I'm coming near one of those corners. Now, with someone else, it's like every time I came to that corner, my husband surprised me with a thing of roses. Oh, and I'm coming to that corner. It's the same corner. It's the same object, but it has a different memory association. And memory association is one of the most important things to understand, because if you want to know why your lover recoils when you do this, or thinks you're an asshole when you do this, and this other person, this former lover, thought that was so funny and so amazing and blah, 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 blah. The difference is memory. The difference is data, memory, set point. This was hilarious and not at all threatening to so-and-so. See, and this is a very important thing to understand, and it ties in with culture. One of the reasons that I love Thailand, and I realized why I love Thailand so much, happened in one of my first trips when I ran out of gas on my motor gas. It's 1 a.m. Now in America, everyone has been told by parents since birth, don't talk to strangers, don't pause, don't make eye contact. They're dangerous people out there. In other words, that all the other Americans out there are horrible, miserable people. Stay away from them. And so we've all learned that. And so if I ran out of gas at 1 a.m. on a dark street, I might have a very long walk, blah, 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 before I got any gas. But this is not what happened. 2 teenage girls were driving by about 2 minutes after I ran out of gas. I didn't hail them because I thought, what's the point? You know, I'll look like a creep because I'm in American culture. They stopped anyway, because in Thai culture, you'd be hospitable to strangers and foreigners. They stop. There's no fear on their face. I'm not a predator. I'm not an axe murderer. I am not that horrible unknown that I am in my own country. I am a human being who could use a little help in a foreign land. And these teenage girls, I think one was around 12, the other probably around 18, in complete darkness, no street lights, no one around, zero fear on their face. And they can't even speak my language, of course, and I can't speak Thai. But they jabber away, and I point at the motorbike, and they say, yeah. And they say something about baht, so I give them 100 baht, which is about $3. And off they go. In a few minutes, they come back with a bottle of gas, and I'm done. There's no fear in the entire interaction. Now, this gets back to memory and culture, because it's a very human impulse to help people. But when you've had 10,000 angry adults saying, don't, what were you thinking? Why did you do this? The impulse to help comes up, but no, that we're not going to be a fool, right? We're not going to be kind and generous. What kind of a fool do you take me for? So you don't help the person. And I wanted to be in a place where you're not punished for helping someone. And so I have lots of memories of helpfulness. So I become a more helpful person. It's fun. I've been helping people in Thailand 10 times more than normal because I've been helped. So this creates the routine, the balance, the memes, the culture, etc. Because that's one of the aspects of culture is memes. Another is beliefs. Another is time and spaces. Another is rituals. Another is values. But memory is a very important thing. Chemicals are another thing that highly affect reality, and they tie in with set point because cortisol, oxytocin, dopamine, addictions, and withdrawal symptoms. These are all chemical variables. So you're taking a drug, whatever it is, you're withdrawing from the drug, whatever it is. Reality looks very different. You're in withdrawal symptoms, someone looks at you a little bit funny. What the fuck are you looking at? You know, it's like, You're in high addicting symbols, a complete person with horrible attitude shouts and it's like, peace be with you, you know? So my point is that chemicals interact with the set point. They interact with your perspective, the choice to take this chemical or other, interacts with, with perspective. It's a very important thing to understand someone's chemical load. This is particularly important with PTSD because chronic chemical loads are stored in the body and the world looks completely different. The brain is functioning differently. The chemical firing pattern in the brain is happening different. So it is a completely different reality. So-and-so sees a friendly face, you see a predator. So-and-so sees someone who's kind and generous, you see someone trying to get something again and hurt you. This is chemical, meaning until the chemical balance is reestablished and PTSD is healed within the brain, you have a completely different reality. And chemicals are between you and I. Your chemicals and my chemicals determine what we see. Culture, I've talked about that, but I'll go into that again. Language, and truths are, I guess, another thing that shapes reality. We love truths, and they come before reality. So if we say that the universe is a friendly place, for example, belief, a truth, we're going to look for the friendly aspects in the reality, and we'll find them. We'll find them because everything has a shadow. Every positive thing has a negative consequence. Every negative consequence has a positive benefit. Have you noticed that? You build your dream house on a new piece of land, and originally, I've done a lot of raw land development. Originally, there were beautiful forests, so there's a cost. Plastic was manufactured in some other country. Fumes were generated on the ship. Oil and grease, shipping containers were hammered out into being that hurt someone's ears who didn't have adequate ear protection. And there is a very big shadow for me getting my dream of the house. I lose the house. The house gets overgrown and ruined because nobody buys it. Nature reclaims the house. My dream house is lost. But in a matter of 50 years, trees are growing up through it. Nature has reclaimed it. Carbon dioxide is generating back in the universe. So what I'm getting at is that the truth that says everything happens for the best or whatever means you can find that. Meaning in that paradox of everything good having a dark side, everything dark having a light side, in that paradox, it gives room for both people, the pessimist and the optimist, to find something that corresponds to their truth. Some of the most productive truths tend to be paradoxical truths, truths that have space for opposites. and all that's in between, because an opposite creates a vast amount of space. And it's in that space, broken down by distinction after distinction after distinction, that reality comes to life. So these are some of the ways that we create consciousness and we create reality. It's important to know that time and space are also measuring devices. It's important to know that if you have a 140 character limit to an expression, you will never get the book Moby Dick. It's important to know that if you have a 30-second soundbite, you will never get Joseph Campbell. It's important to know that if your entire relationship needs to happen in 6 hours, you may or may not have sex, but you're never going to get the depth and breadth of intimacy that someone who spends 10 years co-creating the same relationship with 1,000,000 times more distinctions. The distinction, this is how you were today. This is how you were yesterday. This is how you felt about this a year ago. This is how you feel about it now. This is what you knew about me then. The more distinctions you create, the richer the relationship. The more distinctions in pain you create, the more painful the relationship. The more distinctions in joy you create, the more joyful the relationship. And so time and space defines an object, meaning you can learn everything you need to know about the World Trade Center bombing in 2011 from one 36-second TV spot, or you can have been obsessing about it from the very time that it happened until now. You can be obsessing about it and spend the rest of your life and still not know all that you want to know about that event, because it's about the level of distinctions. It's the big picture, got it, or no. What Haldeman was doing with this person at so-and-so at 8 p.m. It seemed at first he was going like, but new evidence has shown that no, they were in fact doing this, and so-and-so knew so-and-so. And it can go on for an entire lifetime. How much is the time and space? What's the belief? What are the rituals? How about some coffee? What's that? Well, this is where we go to a generally crowded, semi-comfortable space. It's usually a bit noisy in there. And there's these beans or seeds. They've been made in this country over here. Then they've been burnt. Then they've been ground up. They're very bitter. We pour hot water in them. You want to drink it when it's hot, so it just kind of startles you. And then this has this chemical called caffeine. It wakes you up, and we chat about the news, and then we hurry on because we're late for things. Do you want to do that? Okay. But bear in mind, there's 100,000 other rituals that didn't get airtime. What about the ritual of bling? Now, in the bling ritual, would you like to do bling together? In the bling ritual, it's a very different culture. In the bling ritual, you set out from two opposite sides of a mountain. You find two mountains nearby. You have to drive a few hundred miles if you're in the plains, whatever, but you find two mountains or two destinations that have a mountain trail. Now, you each give each other a series of truths and details about one another. This is a getting to know one another ritual bling. So you begin at this end of the trail. I begin at this end of the trail. And the whole thing, we imagine what it would be like to get to know each other. And at every few hundred yards, whatever, when we feel right, we open up one of the pages in the book of who you are. And we read it, and we meditate, and we contemplate, and we anticipate, and we prepare pair. And after about 2 or 3 hours, we meet at some point where we don't know where it is in the trail. We meet. And we each make a sound. We make a sound that is the sound that comes out of our gut relative to all that we've digested about that person. We make a sound that is the sound that it comes from the gut. Whatever that sound is, we see who makes the first sound, and that is the masculine pole in the relationship. And then the feminine is what sound comes out in response of that. And for the next 24 hours, when the masculine pole takes the lead in shaping the relationship, and after 24 hours, we assess, are we people that like each other and like ourselves more than before we met, or not? And by how much? And based on that, we determine whether we get married or we determine whether we never see each other again. And that's bling. Would you like to do bling? Now, the point is that cultures are incredibly boring. And that's their job. Their job is to institutionalize boring, often inefficient protocols and rituals that allow people not to think, so that their minds can exit the traumatic state or the new hedonic adaptation and go through and be in a routine that doesn't require too much thought and energy, and that feels familiar, because when anything feels familiar, it feels safe. It's a very interesting thing in cultures, and it's a very interesting thing in relationships, that it doesn't matter who the person is. It doesn't matter if they're an axe murderer, rapist, this, that, the other. If someone will show up and do the same thing over and over and over again consistently in close proximity to you, your brain is going to say, I'm still alive, I know this pattern, I'm safe. Now this could be someone who comes and shouts every day. You say, oh, that's a crazy person, that's what he does. He just shouts, then he goes back to his house. Okay, here he comes shouting, hello, nothing. I feel safe and comfortable with this man. Now, this other person smiles, but I've never seen him before. It's a new face. I don't feel safe. Now, rituals make people feel safe, whether they are intelligent or not, whether they are efficient or not, whether they are the best rituals that someone could come up with. Let's go and get coffee. Let's go and do this 20-minute rush crowded thing and this weird thing and be a little bit nervous and da-da-da-da-da and change the subject and do this and then rush out about our busy lives. See, this produces a certain state of consciousness. It produces a certain probability field of experience that is very different than bling. That's very different than Kwong. That's very different than any of 2 billion other rituals of the, million or so rituals in the 10,000 or so cultures that we've already had, and the billions of cultures that we have not yet created. It's mindful to be aware of that, because what is real, what is observed and measured that shows up in a coffee date, is not real in a bling date, is not real in a tantric date, is not real in a blindfolded date, is not real in an art date, is not real in a finger painting nude date. In the finger painting nude date, 2 people who've never met each other take turns painting finger paints over each other's nude bodies, and they decide to go on a date if they like the art after the painting is done. And if they don't, they take a shower, namaste, and go about their lives. Now, what's interesting with every ritual is it brings certain things into focus. So bling brings meditation and nature into focus. It's the slow, romantic saga, the Lawrence of Arabia ritual of meeting. You got the coffee date, which is the hurried, crammed ritual of meeting, which is all about whether you're up to date, fast, nervous enough, busy enough to be important. You've got the body painting, finger painting date, which, for example, for anyone who has a love language of touch, is going to be a key communicator, because the coffee date and the bling date do not involve the primary love language of one of the people involved, so they have no idea, do they like this person or not? They certainly don't feel loved because they've not been touched in either of the rituals. But in the finger painting nude interview, you've not only seen the visual art of how would you paint me? If you could paint me any way you wanted, how would you paint me? What does that look like? So this is for people who are in conceptual. But it's also, how slow do you paint me? What's your touch range? You've got the touch range that drives me wild. I can love you. I can feel loved by you. I can't love you. I can't feel loved by you. It doesn't matter this, and this, because my attention is oriented through the love that comes through the language and touch. And this is just one more thing in the 5 love languages where language plays such an important role. So I'll leave it with that. This is how we take things out of the unknown into the known unknown, into the known, process them into our 5 senses, in so doing creating an object that is conscious, then process them through these and many other things, meaning this was just today's riff, many other things, and end up with consciousness, with an object that is conscious, but that is seen from multiple different angles at multiple moments in time. And I'll leave you with one final thing, which I think is an important element of consciousness. And I'm going to just take a quick picture here before erasing this. I'll leave you with one more thing, and it's called depth perception. And I could have left that face there. But once we've brought an object into focus, I'm looking at it from here, you're looking at it from here, so-and-so's looking at it from here, so-and-so's looking at it from here. Let's take the Earth. So the sun's over here, shining here. What is reality? It's dark. No, it's not. It's light. It's hot. No, it's not. It's cold. It's dark. It's light. It's hot. It's cold. It's everything in between. It's every paradoxical thing. Now, why is this important? Well, first of all, reality is really, really big. Secondly, more than 50% of it is determined by the filters we look at, we look through to see it. Another 50% is determined what we actually focus on and see. So you have pretty much 99% subjective reality. I'm looking at this bit, you're looking at this bit, etc., etc. And it's quite an accomplishment to get on the same page, mentally, emotionally, physically. Now, where does this tie in? Do you want to be in an either-or reality where no, it's sunny, no, it's dark, and one has to be right? Or do you want to be in a paradoxical reality where reality is bigger than any one viewer? Every viewer sees a piece of it. No one is wrong as long as they're reporting honestly what they're experiencing.
No one is wrong. But if you can only see half of the world that's light, you're only seeing half the world. If you can also borrow the eyes of this person over here who is seeing the half of the world that is dark, you now see the whole world. In other words, the more people's perspectives that you incorporate into your own sense of truth, the more depth perception you have. In the same way that if this eye is closed, I only see so much depth. If this eye is closed, I only see so much depth. But the reason we have two eyes is actually to triangulate objects in depth field and have a clearer sense of how far away they are. In other words, when you look through two eyes simultaneously, you get depth perception. When you look through two eyes simultaneously that are 6 inches apart, you get a little bit of depth perception. When you look through 7 billion eyes that are thousands of miles apart, you get a depth perception that is capable of taking in 7 billion times more than your own senses are capable of taking in. It is capable of adding dimensionality and depth perception to reality. And there is an endless field of dimensionality from endless perspectives, including the space-time element, through endless senses, of which we have only 5. It's all out there, waiting for us to create it with the right observing and measuring devices, to see it and then filter it in such a way that what we value, that who we are, that who we want to be, comes more and more into focus. And that's exciting.